Thank you, Karen. So now we'll talk about behavioral incidents. That's one of the older submissions for end of year three, the incidents or student discipline. It's important to understand which incidents that need to be reported. And those are only those that are outlined in Ed Code 48900 and 48915. And these particular two sections of the Ed Code will tell you, the purpose is to tell you which offenses are suspendable, that's 48900, or the guidelines for expulsion, that's 48915. And then when behavioral incidents were added, seclusion and restraints, the reference for that is Ed Code 49005.1. Of course, that was introduced a couple years ago in Flash 159. But typically, if you don't have a violation of Ed Code, you wouldn't want to report those incidents. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. And then your MPS expectations, along with collecting data for your seclusion and restraints, we also started emphasizing the responsibility for LEAs to collect the discipline or student incident data for MPS schools. And we say LEAs collect that data because you have to provide a mechanism and a line of communication for your MPS schools to be able to communicate to you those incidents. You have to make sure they understand what's required so that you can report it. When we initially had the webinar, Brandy and Shiloh, I was able to assist them. The first year, people didn't have that mechanism in place. The MPS schools didn't know all the different elements required. And so you would get information that might have a date and say suspension, but it had no description of what the event was or the incident. So you didn't know what offense code to use. You didn't have a reason for the suspension, or it would describe, two students without a date. And it would say they had this incident, which was maybe a physical altercation, but you're trying to identify the date of which it happened. So hopefully over the past 2 years, you've established processes and a line of communication. If not, you can easily point your MPS schools to the FigMat CSIS YouTube channel. There's a recorded training. I think Marshall might have just edited one.
You talk about the MPS?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Guess
And so,
what?
yeah, 12 minutes ago, Marshall just did that. That was updated this year. Um, so that's just, one way that you can communicate their responsibility for reporting if they don't know. And then we have terminology, right? When we think of incidents, we're describing what typically are events that in which a offense occurs, right? Or if not an offense, a behavioral incident would result in seclusion or restraint. And so it could have multiple students involved. It could be a single student incident. And then every incident has an outcome or result. And so often, historically, this would be your discipline. But again, with behavioral incidents, I don't like to say discipline, or discipline's not exclusive. Some incident results are no action, or they are the reporting of the seclusion or the restraint. And that could be just for a student's safety without any discipline or violation of Ed Code. And then statutory offense, again, these are the reasons why you're reporting most of your incidents. These offenses have been outlined in 48900 to 48915 as justifiable reasons for suspension or expulsion. And then you have seclusion, the involuntary confinement of a pupil alone in a room or area which the pupil is physically prevented from leaving. So just separating a student isn't exactly seclusion, right? They have to be physically prevented from leaving. And then you have two types of restraint, mechanical and physical. Mechanical would be the use of a device to restrict the student's movement. Physical restraint is when the student is physically held or immobilized by another person, teacher or administrator, potentially law enforcement. So I was kind of speaking earlier and thinking about the submission sequence. So incidents, student discipline, it requires the submission of 3 files: the sync, which is the student incident, the SIRS, which is the student results, and then the student offense, the SOF, right? All of these files are dependent on you having a student enrolled at the school where the incident's being reported. So remember, when it comes to reporting the incident, that's the event which led to the discipline, right? However, you want to report where the incident occurred or potentially where the discipline was administered from. so that student's enrollment. So the example would be if you have two campuses right next to each other, could be high school and a middle school, or maybe an alternative ed school and a traditional school, and there's a fight between students from both of those schools, or two high schools, and students meet up at a football game and fight, whatever may happen. The students will have separate incidents in that case, because the incident is specific to that school. That student's discipline is specific to where they're being disciplined from. So if you're suspended from the school you enrolled. So, we try to help you visualize if you haven't reported before, or if you come across that scenario. Most incidents, of course, happen at the school where the student is enrolled and attends. But in the case that it doesn't, when you're thinking it through how it should be reported, um, when you report that surge record, where's the student being suspended from? So if I walk over to Marshall's neighborhood and we fight at the school in which he attended, I'm still going to be suspended from my school where I'm enrolled. So that's something that comes up sometimes in relation to the submission of these three different files. Also, your sync has to always have a result. And there's results code for other means of correction. So not every student is suspended or expelled. This could be a referral, perhaps a detention. Then you have students who have multiple results. So sometimes a student may eventually be suspended or expelled, but in the moment they were so aggressive or so out of control, they had to be restrained. You're going to have two different results, one saying the student was restrained, and then the eventual suspension or expulsion. So a student can have multiple results, and then incident may have multiple students, and each student may have multiple results. And then, of course, anytime there's a violation of ed code, you're going to have student offense records as well.